Welcome to another round. We're gonna get better at this, or we won't. We're still figuring it out. Who knows? Anyways, this is your daily dose of D, daily dose with D, and guest of the mutt variety. She's a little cold, so she's sitting on the other side all by herself, because that makes more sense. We left off, I'm just gonna jump right in because it's the part 2, right? So we were in the middle of reading, and we were in the middle of reading. I haven't decided if I'm gonna include the 5 minutes of the one that I did in the middle of the time. Obviously I'm in a new outfit, so this means that it's a different day. It doesn't mean it being a different outfit it does not necessitate that it is a different day. However, it is. I am very terrible at reading daily. It's a goal. We're working on it together, juntos. And by juntos I mean me and myself, and none of my followers, because I have no followers right now. Okay. There was something I was saying and I forgot. Nope. Okay. Oh, I haven't decided if I was going to include that. There was a little bit of monologue, mostly just monologue. Didn't really get to read a lot anyways, so might not. I'm gonna reread that part anyways, so if I do include it, there's gonna be like half a paragraph that's repeated. All right. Well, let's go. America's Deadliest Export, Democracy, The Truth About U.S. Foreign Policy and Everything Else, by William Blum. We love bookmarks. Reforming the Indonesian military for 40 years. On May 25th, 2005, President Bush stated that it makes sense for the United States to maintain close military ties with Indonesia, despite the objections of human rights activists who say such coordination should be withheld until Indonesia does more to address human rights abuses by its military. We want young officers from Indonesia coming to the United States, said Bush. We want there to be exchanges between our military corps that will help lead to better understandings. Excuse me. Bush made his remarks after meeting with the Indonesian president, who, Bush added, told me he's in the process of reforming the military, and I believe him. Parentheses. In May 2002, Indonesian Defense Minister Matori met with U.S. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld at the Pentagon. Matori said his government had begun to reform the military. Rumsfeld believed him enough to call for military-to-military relations to be reestablished. You can't see those. I'm quoting. End of parentheses. Indonesian officials say they're going to reform the military is like officials in Nevada saying they're going to crack down on gambling. For 40 years, the Indonesian military has engaged in mass murder and other atrocities in Jakarta, East Timor, Aceh, Papua, and elsewhere, taking the lives of well over 1 million people. I apologize if I mispronounce things. I will educate myself continually. I can do so now if we want to. But no, I want to keep reading. I don't think I was that off. And I could be. And that's okay, because I'm learning. It's okay to be wrong if you learn. It's okay to be wrong. It's not okay to keep being wrong because you like it. Like, that's not okay. But, like, it's the first time I've ever said that I can remember. Maybe not. I've read a lot of things in my life. And so if I'm wrong, I'll learn. I am not going to take the 5 minutes right now, though, because I want to keep reading. Because I've been really bad at this goal, and I keep letting myself. I'm talking again. Nope, we're gonna read. Weird. I like to do anything else, distract any little other thing. No. I used to read for hours as a child. I used to be able to read a book in a day. I can barely keep my brain focused for a page. Half a page. Half a page. Technically a paragraph and a half. Taking the lives of well over 1 million people, including several Americans in recent years. For 40 years, relations between the U.S. and Indonesian militaries have been one of the very closest of such contracts in the Third World for the United States, despite the occasional objections and prohibitions from Congress. For 40 years, American officials have been saying that they have to continue training and arming Indonesia's military because the contact with the American military will have some kind of ennobling effect. For 40 years, it has had no such effect at all. As Senator Tom Harkin, a Democrat from Iowa, observed in 1999, I have seen no evidence in my 24 years I don't know what the fuck that was. I have seen no evidence in my 24 years in Congress of one instance where, because of American military involvement with another military, that the Americans have stopped that foreign army from carrying out atrocities against their own people. No evidence, none. Yet the pretense continues, for what else can an American official say? Something like the following: quote, "We don't care how brutal the Indonesian military is because they got rid of Sukarno and his irritating nationalism and neutralism for us. And for 40 years, they've been killing people we call communists, killing people we call terrorists, and protecting our oil, natural gas, mining, and other corporate interests against Indonesian protesters." Now, if that's not freedom or democracy, I don't know what is. Can we read that one again? Yet the pretense continues. For what else can an American official say? Something like the following? Quote, "We don't care how brutal the Indonesian military is because they got rid of Sukarno and his irritating nationalism and neutralism for us. And for 40 years they've been killing people we call communists, killing people we call terrorists, protecting our oil, natural gas, mining, and other corporate interests against Indonesian protesters. Now, if that's not freedom and democracy, I don't know what is." That was my best impression of any of the white men who run our government. Or run. Such an active word for such a passive group who sit in our government. That's how they sound in my head. As we'll see from State Department cables in the WikiLeaks chapter, the Obama administration renewed military ties with Indonesia in spite of serious concerns expressed by American diplomats that the Indonesian military's human rights abuses in the province of West Papua were stoking unrest in the region. The United States also overturned a ban on training the Indonesian Kopassus Army Special Forces, despite the Kopassus' long history of arbitrary detention, torture, and murder, after the Indonesian president threatened to derail President Obama's trip to the country in November 2010. We have time. Chapter 2. Terrorism. A safer world for Americans, ... if they don't leave home. Pardon me. Supporters of U.S. foreign policy have been repeating the point ever since the attacks of September 11th, 2001. U.S. counterterrorism policy has worked. How do they know? Because there haven't been any successful terrorist attacks in the United States in all of the years since that infamous day. True. But there weren't any terrorist attacks in the United States in the 6 years before September 11th, 2001 either. The last one being the Oklahoma City bombing in April 19th, 1995. The absence of terrorist attacks in the U.S. appears to be the norm, with or without a war on terror. More significantly, in the years since 9/11, the United States has been the target of terrorist attacks on scores of occasions, not even counting those in Iraq or Afghanistan. Attacks on military, diplomatic, civilian, Christian, and other targets associated with the United States. in the Middle East, South Asia, and the Pacific more than a dozen times in Pakistan alone. The attacks include the October 2002 bombings of two nightclubs in Bali, Indonesia, which killed more than 200 people, almost all of them Americans or citizens of their Australian and British war allies. The following year brought the heavy bombing of the U.S. managed Marriott Hotel in Jakarta, Indonesia, the site of diplomatic receptions and 4th of July celebrations held by the American Embassy, and other horrendous attacks in later years on U.S. allies in Madrid and London because of the war. Land of the Free, home of the War on Terror. David Hicks is a 31-year-old Australian who, in a plea bargain with the U.S. military court, served 9 months in prison, largely in Australia. That was after 5 years at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, without being charged with a crime, without a trial, without a conviction. Under the deal, Hicks agreed not to talk to reporters for 1 year. A terrible slap in the face of free speech. To forever waive any profit from telling his story. A slap, mon Dieu, in the face of free enterprise. To submit to U.S. interrogation and testify at future U.S. trials or international tribunals. An open invitation to the U.S. government to hound the young man for the rest of his life. To renounce any claims of mistreatment or unlawful detention, a requirement which would be unconstitutional in a civilian U.S. court. Quote, if the United States were not ashamed of its conduct, it wouldn't hide behind a gag order, said Hicks attorney Ben Wisner of the American Civil Liberties Union. Like so many other terrorists held by the United States in the recent years, Hicks had been sold to the American military for a bounty offered by the U.S., a phenomenon repeatedly frequented. I messed up. Try again. A phenomenon repeated frequently in Afghanistan and Pakistan. U.S. officials had to know that once they offered payments to a very poor area to turn in bodies, almost anyone was fair game. Other terrorists have been turned in as reprisals for all sorts of personal hatreds and feuds. Many others, abroad and in the United States, have been incarcerated by the United States simply for working for, or merely contributing money to, charitable organizations with alleged or real ties to a terrorist organization, as determined by a list kept by the State Department, a list conspicuously political. It was recently disclosed to an Iraqi resident of Britain. It was recently disclosed that an Iraqi resident of Britain is being released from Guantanamo after 4 years. His crime? He refused to work as an informer for the CIA and MI5, the British Security Service. His business partner is still being held in Guantanamo for the same crime. His crime was that he refused to work as an informer for the CIA and MI5. Because they killed their informers. The fuck? Also, why would you want to help the United States? Continue. Finally, there are those many other poor souls who have been picked up simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Quote, most of these guys weren't fighting, they were running. General Martin Lucenti, former deputy commander of Guantanamo, has pointed out. Thousands of people have been thrown into hell on Earth for no earthly reason. The world media have been overflowing with their individual tales of horror and sadness for years. Guantanamo's former commander, General J. Hood, said, quote, sometimes we just didn't get the right folks. Not that the torture they were put through would be justified if they were, in fact, quote, the right folks. Hicks was taken into custody in Afghanistan in 2001. He was a convert to Islam and, like others from many countries, had gone to Afghanistan for religious reasons, had wound up on the side of the Taliban in the civil war that had been going on since the early 1990s, and had received military training at a Taliban camp. The United States has insisted on calling such camps, quote, terrorist training camps, or, quote, anti-American terrorist training camps, or, quote, Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps. Almost every individual or group not in love with U.S. foreign policy that Washington wants to stigmatize is charged with being associated with or being a member of Al Qaeda. As if there's a precise and meaningful distinction between people retaliating against the atrocities of American imperialism while being a member of Al Qaeda and retaliating against the atrocities of American imperialism while not being a member of Al Qaeda. As if Al Qaeda gives out membership cards to fit into your wallet, and there are chapters of Al Qaeda that put out a weekly newsletter and hold a potluck on the first Monday of every month. It should be noted that for nearly half a century, much of southern Florida has been one big training camp for anti-Castro terrorists. None of their groups, which have carried out many hundreds of serious terrorist acts in the U.S. as well as abroad, including bombing a passenger airplane in flight, is on the State Department list. Nor were the Contras of Nicaragua in the 1980s, heavily supported by the United States, about whom former CIA Director Stansfield Turner testified, quote, "I believe it is irrefutable that a number of the Contras' action have to be characterized as terrorism, as state-supported terrorism." The same applies to groups in Kosovo and Bosnia, with close ties to Al-Qaeda, including Osama bin Laden in the recent past, which have allied themselves with Washington's agenda in the former Yugoslavia since the 1990s. Now we learn of U.S. support for a Pakistani group called Jundullah and led by a Taliban, which has taken responsibility for the kidnappings and deaths of more than a dozen Iranian soldiers and officials in cross-border attacks. Do not hold your breath waiting for the name Jundullah to appear on the State Department list of terrorist organizations, nor any of the several other ethnic militias being supported by the CIA to carry out terrorist bombing and assassination attacks in Iran. The same political selectivity applies to many of the groups which are on the list, particularly those opposed to American or Israeli policies. Amid growing pressure from their home countries and international human rights advocates, scores of Guantanamo. I cannot read the word and say it. I can say it, Guantanamo, but if I try doing Guantanamo, I cannot read the word. I can only say it. What is wrong? Scores of Guantanamo detainees have been quietly repatriated in the past 3 years. Now, a new analysis by lawyers who have represented detainees at this 21st century's devil's land. What the? I am tongue-tied over easy words. Oh my lordy heavens. Now, a new analysis by lawyers who have represented detainees at this 21st century Devil's Island says this policy undermines Washington's own claims about the threat posed by many of the prison camp's residents. The report, based on U.S. government case files for Saudi detainees sent home over the past 3 years, shows inmates being systematically freed from custody within weeks of their return. In half the cases studied, the detainees had been turned over to U.S. forces by Pakistani police or troops in return for financial rewards. Many others were accused of terrorism connections in part because their Arab nicknames matched those found in a computer database of Al-Qaeda members, documents show. In December, a survey by the Associated Press found that 84% of released detainees, 205 out of 245 individuals whose cases could be tracked, were set free after being released to the custody of their native countries. There are certainly bad people in Guantanamo Bay, but there are also cases where it's hard to understand why the people are still there, said Anant Raut, co-author of the report, who has visited the detention camp 3 times. We were struggling to find some rationality, something to comfort us that it wasn't just random, but we didn't find it. The report states that many of the U.S. attempts to link the detainees to terrorism groups were based on evidence the authors describe as circumstantial and, quote, highly questionable, such as the travel routes the detainees had followed in flying commercially from one Middle Eastern country to another. American officials have associated certain travel routes with Al Qaeda, when in fact, says the report, the routes involve ordinary connecting flights in major international airports. With regard to accusations based on similar names, the report states, quote, this accusation appears to be based upon little more than similarities in the transliterations of a detainee's name and a name found on one of the hard drives. Raoult said he was most struck by the high percentage of Saudi detainees who had been captured and turned over by Pakistani forces. In effect, he said, for at least half the individuals in his report, the United States, quote, had no first-hand knowledge of their activities in Afghanistan before their capture and imprisonment. When Michael Schauer, the former CIA officer who headed the agency's Osama bin Laden unit, was told that the largest group in Guantanamo came from custody in Pakistan, he declared, we absolutely got the wrong people. Never mind. They were all treated equally, all thrown into solitary confinement, shackled, blindfolded, forced to undergo excruciating physical contortions for long periods, denied medicine, sensory deprivation, and sleep deprivation were used, along with 24 other methods of torture which American officials do not call torture. If you torture these officials, they might admit that it's torturous light. The idea is to build an anti-terrorist global environment, a senior American defense official said in 2003, so that in 20 to 30 years, terrorism will be like slave trading, completely discredited. The American prison system is slavery. It is a slave trade system. It has been completely privatized at this point. I don't care if there are some state ones. They are still privatized in the sense that the state pays someone else to do them. So they're state funded, but they're run by private organizations and corporations. And they absolutely do trade their inmates for profit margins. And their inmates do labor for free. They're not allowed to choose what they wear. They're not allowed to choose what they eat. They're not allowed to choose when they eat. They're not allowed to choose how they keep their hair or their face or their body. They are slaves. The U.S. prison system is slavery. I am frustrated because slave trading is not discredited. Slavery has not been discredited. We simply took and gave it a different name. But it's the same shit. It's the same fucking shit. When will the dropping of bombs on innocent civilians by the United States and invading and occupying their country without their country attacking or threatening the U.S. become completely discredited? When will the use of depleted uranium and cluster bombs in CIA torture renditions become things that even men like George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld will be too embarrassed to defend? When will that happen? Australian/British journalist John Pilger has noted that in George Orwell's 1984, quote, 3 slogans dominate society. War is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. Today's slogan, war on terrorism, also reverses meaning. The war is terrorism. We're going to stop there. The war that we start, the wars that we carry out, the wars that the U.S. government funds and sends Americans to die in and kills others in, they are terrorist acts. It's not weird. It's weird if you think they're not. We were not attacked. We were not. We were not. We are going to decompress on this other side. And we are going to read the wonderful, the magical, The Ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Chapter 17. After a fairly shaky start to the day, Arthur's mind was beginning to reassemble itself from the shell-shocked fragments the previous day had left him with. He had found a nutrimatic machine which had provided him with a plastic cup filled with a liquid that was almost, but not quite, entirely unlike tea. The way it functioned was very interesting. When the drink button was pressed, it made an instant but highly detailed examination of the subject's taste buds, a spectroscopic analysis of the subject's metabolism, and then sent tiny experimental signals down the neural pathways to the taste centers of the subject's brain to see what was likely to go down well. However, no one knew quite why it did this because it invariably delivered a cup full of liquid that was almost, but not quite, entirely unlike tea. The Nutramatic was designed and manufactured by the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation, whose complaints department now covers all the major land masses of the first 3 planets in the Sirius Tau star system. Arthur drank the liquid and found it reviving. He glanced up at the screens again and watched a few more 100 miles of barren grayness slide past. It suddenly occurred to him to ask a question that had been bothering him. "Is it safe?" he said. "Magrathea has been dead for 5 million years," said Zaphod. "Of course it's safe. Even the ghosts will have settled down and raised families by now." At which point, a strange and inexplicable sound thrilled suddenly through the bridge. A noise as of a distant fanfare. A hollow, reedy, insubstantial sound. Oh my god. This motherfucker with the whatever your engine finally fucking left. So loud. A noise as of a distant fanfare, a hollow, reedy, insubstantial sound. It preceded a voice that was equally hollow, reedy, and insubstantial. The voice said, "Greetings to you." Someone from the dead planet was talking to them. Sorry. The dog has taken a new habit to sitting at the corner of the bed to stare out the window. It's cute. It's very cute. Computer, shouted Zaphod. "Hi there. What the photon is it?" "Oh, just some 5 million year old tape that's being broadcast at us." "A what? A recording?" "Shush," said Ford. "It's carrying on." The voice was old, courteous, almost charming, but was underscored with quite unmistakable menace. "This is a recorded announcement," it said, "as I'm afraid we're all out at the moment. The Commercial Council of Magrathea thanks you for your esteemed visit." "A voice from ancient Magrathea," said Zaphod. Okay, said Ford. "But regrets," continued the voice, "that the entire planet is temporarily closed for business. Thank you. If you would care to leave your name and the address of a planet where you can be contacted, kindly speak when you hear the tone." A short buzz followed, then silence. "They want to get rid of us," said Trillian nervously. "But do we do?" "It's just a recording," said Zaphod. "We keep going. Got that, computer?" "I got it," said the computer, and gave the ship an extra kick of speed. They waited. After a second or so, the fanfare once again, and then the voice. "We would like to assure you that as soon as our business is resumed, announcements will be made in all fashionable magazines and color supplements, when our clients will once again be able to select from all that's best in contemporary geography. The menace in the voice took on a sharper edge. Meanwhile, we thank our clients for their kind interest and would ask them to leave. Now. Arthur looked round the nervous faces of his companions. Well, I suppose we'd better be going then, hadn't we? He suggested. Shh, said Zaphod. There's absolutely nothing to be worried about. Then why is everyone so tense? They're just interested, shouted Zaphod. Computer, start descent into the atmosphere and prepare for landing. This time the fanfare was quite perfunctory, the voice now distinctly cold. It is most gratifying, it said, that your enthusiasm for our planet continues unabated, and so we would like to assure you that the guided missiles currently converging with your ship are part of a special service we extend to all of our most enthusiastic clients. And the fully armed nuclear warheads are of course merely a courtesy detail. We look forward to your custom in future lives. Thank you. The voice snapped off. Oh, said Trillian. Said Arthur. Well, said Ford. Look. Said Zaphod. Will you get it into your heads? That's just a recorded message. It's millions of years old. It doesn't apply to us. Get it? What said Trillian quietly about the missiles? Missiles? Don't make me laugh. Ford tapped Zaphod on the shoulder and pointed at the rear screen. Clear in the distance behind them, 2 silver darts were climbing through the atmosphere toward the ship. A quick change in magnification brought them into close focus. 2 massively real rockets thundering through the sky. The suddenness of it was quite shocking. I think they're going to have a very good try at applying to us, said Ford. Zaphod stared at them in astonishment. Hey, this is terrific, he said. Someone down there is trying to kill us. Terrific, said Arthur. But don't you see what this means? Yes, we're going to die. Yes, but apart from that. Apart from that? It means we must be on to something. How soon can we get off it? Second by second, the image of the missiles on the screen grew larger. They had swung round now onto a direct homing course, so that all that could be seen of them now was the warheads, head on. As a matter of interest, said Trillian, what are we going to do? Just keep cool, said Zaphod. Is that all? Shouted Arthur. No, we're also going to take evasive action, said Zaphod with a sudden access of panic. Computer, what evasive action can we take? None, I'm afraid, guys, said the computer. Or something, said Zaphod. He said. There seems to be something jamming my guidance systems, explained the computer brightly. Impact minus 45 seconds. Please call me Eddie if it will help you to relax. Zaphod tried to run in several equally decisive directions simultaneously. Right, he said. We've got to get manual control of this ship. Can you fly her? Asked Ford pleasantly. No. Can you? No. Trillian, can you? No. Fine, said Zaphod, relaxing. We'll do it all together. I can't either, said Arthur, who felt it was time he began to assert himself. I'd guess that, said Zaphod. Okay, computer, I want full manual control now. You got it, said the computer. Several large desk panels slid open, and banks of control consoles sprang up out of them, showering the crew with bits of expanded polystyrene packaging and balls of rolled-up cellophane. These controls had never been used before. Zaphod stared at them wildly. Okay, Ford, he said. Full retro thrust and 10 degrees starboard. Or something. Good luck, guys, chirped the computer. Impact minus 30 seconds. Ford leaped to the controls. Only a few of them made any immediate sense to him, so he pulled those. The ship shook and screamed as its guidance rockets jets tried to push it in every which way simultaneously. He released half of them, and the ship spun around in a tight arc and headed back the way it had come, straight toward the oncoming missiles. Air cushions ballooned out of the walls in an instant as everyone was thrown against them. For a few seconds, the inertial forces held them flattened and squirming for breath, unable to move. Zaphod struggled and pushed in manic desperation and finally managed a savage kick at a small lever that formed part of the guidance system. The lever snapped off. The ship twisted sharply and rocketed upward. The crew were hurled violently back across the cabin. Ford's copy of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy smashed into another section of the control console with the combined result that the guide started to explain to anyone who cared to listen about the best ways of smuggling Antarian parakeet glands out of Antarius. An Antarian parakeet gland stuck on a small stick is a revolting but much sought-after cocktail delicacy, and very large sums of money are often paid for them by rich idiots who want to impress other also very rich idiots. and the ship suddenly dropped off to the sky like a stone. Mobby. I was shaking the computer. The camera. It was, of course, more or less at this moment that one of the crew sustained a nasty bruise to the upper arm. This should be emphasized because, as has already been revealed, they escape otherwise completely unharmed, and the deadly nuclear missiles do not eventually hit the ship. The safety of the crew is absolutely assured. Impact minus 20 seconds, guys, said the computer. Then turn the bloody engines back on, bawled Zaphod. Oh, sure thing, guys, said the computer. With a subtle roar, the engines cut back in. The ship smoothly flattened out of its dive and headed back toward the missiles again. The computer started to sing. When you walk through the storm, it whined nasally. Hold your head up high. Zaphod screamed at it to shut up, but his voice was lost in the din of what they quite naturally assumed was approaching destruction. And don't be afraid of the dark, Eddie wailed. The ship, in flattening out, had in fact flattened out upside down, and lying on the ceiling as they were, it was now totally impossible for any of the crew to reach the guidance systems. At the end of the storm, crooned Eddie. The two missiles loomed massively on the screens as they thundered towards the ships. Is a golden sky. But by an extraordinarily lucky chance, they had not yet fully corrected their flight paths to that of the erratically weaving ship, and they passed right under it. And the sweet silver song of the lark. Revised impact time, 15 seconds, fellas. Walk on through the wind. The missiles banked round in a screeching arc and plunged back in pursuit. This is it, said Arthur, watching them. We are now quite definitely going to die, aren't we? I wish you'd stop saying that, shouted Ford. Well, we are, aren't we? Yes. Walk on through the rain, sang Eddie. A thought struck Arthur. He struggled to his feet. Why doesn't anyone turn on this improbability drive thing, he said. We could probably reach that. What are you, crazy, said Zaphod. Without proper programming, anything could happen. Does that matter at this stage, shouted Arthur. Though your dreams be tossed and blown, sang Eddie. Arthur scrambled up onto one of the excitingly chunky pieces of molded contouring where the curve of the wall met the ceiling. Walk on with hope in your heart. Does anyone know why Arthur can't turn on the improbability drive, shouted Trillian. And you'll never walk alone. Impact minus 5 seconds. It's been great knowing you guys. God bless. You'll never walk alone. I said, yelled Trillian. Does anyone know? The next thing that happened was a mind-mangling explosion of noise and light. Chapter 18. And the next thing that happened after that was the Heart of Goldton continued on its way perfectly normally with a rather fetchingly redesigned interior. It was somewhat larger and done out in delicate pastel shades of green and blue. In the center, a spiral staircase leading nowhere in particular stood in a spray of ferns and yellow flowers, and next to it a stone sundial pedestal housed the main computer terminal. Cunningly deployed lighting and mirrors created the illusion of standing in a conservatory overlooking a wide stretch of exquisitely manicured garden. Around the periphery of the conservatory area stood marble-top tables on intricately beautiful wrought iron legs. As you gazed into the polished surface of the marble, the vague forms of instruments became visible, and as you touched them, the instruments materialized instantly under your hands. Looked at from the correct angles, the mirrors appeared to reflect all the required data readouts, though it was far from clear where they were reflected from. It was, in fact, sensationally beautiful. Relaxed in a wickerwork sun chair, Zaphod Beeblebrock said, "What the hell happened?" "Well, I was just saying," said Arthur, lounging by a small fish pool. "There's this improbability drive switch over here." He waved at where it had been. There was a potted plant there now. "But where are we?" said Ford, who was sitting on the spiral staircase, a nicely chilled pan-galactic gargle blaster in his hand. "Exactly where we were, I think," said Trillian. As all about them, the mirror suddenly showed them an image of the blighted landscape of Magrathea, which still scooted along beneath them. Zaphod leaped out of his seat. "Then what's happened to the missiles?" he said. A new and astounding image appeared to the mirrors. They would appear, said Ford doubtfully, to have turned into a bowl of petunias and a very surprised looking whale. At an improbability factor, cut in Eddie, who hadn't changed a bit, of 8,767,128 to 1 against. Zaphod stared at Arthur. Did you think of that, Earthman? He demanded. Well, said Arthur, all I did was, that's a very good thinking, you know. Turn on the improbability drive for a second without first activating the proofing screens. Hey, kid, you just saved our lives, you know that. Oh, said Arthur. Well, it was nothing, really. Was it? Said Zaphod. Oh, well, forget it then. Okay, computer, take us into land. But I said forget it. Another thing that got forgotten was the fact that against all probability, a sperm whale had suddenly been called into existence several miles above the surface of an alien planet. And since this is not a naturally tenable position for a whale, this poor innocent creature had very little time to come to terms with its identity as a whale before it then had to come to terms with not being a whale anymore. This is a complete record of its thought from the moment it began its life to the moment it ended it. Ah, what's happening, it thought. Excuse me, who am I? Hello? Why am I here? What's my purpose in life? What do I mean by who am I? Calm down, get a grip now. Oh, this is an interesting sensation. What is it? It's sort of yawning, tingling sensation in my, well, I suppose I'd better start finding names for things I want to make any headway in. What, for the sake of what I shall call an argument, I shall call the world. So let's call it my stomach. Good. Ooh, it's getting quite strong. And hey, what about this whistling, roaring sound going past what I'm suddenly going to call my head? Perhaps I can call that wind. Is it a good name? It'll do. Perhaps I can find a better name for it later when I found out what it's for. It must be something very important because there certainly seems to be a hell of a lot of it. Hey, what's this thing? Let's call it a tail. Yeah, tail. Hey, I can really thrash it around pretty good, can't I? Wow, that feels great. Doesn't seem to achieve very much, but I'll probably find out what it's for later on. Now, have I built up any coherent picture of things yet? No. Never mind. Hey, this is really exciting. So much to find out about. So much to look forward to. I'm quite dizzy with anticipation. Or is it the wind? There really is a lot of that now, isn't there? And wow, hey, what's this thing suddenly coming toward me very fast? Very, very fast. So big and flat and round it needs a big, wide-sounding name like round, ground. That's it. That's a good name, ground. I wonder if it will be friends with me. And then the rest, after a sudden wet thud, was silence. Curiously enough, the only thing that went through the mind of the bowl of petunias as it fell was, oh no, not again. Many people have speculated that if we knew exactly why the bowl of petunias had thought that we would know a lot more about the nature of the universe than we do now. We're going to do one more. Okay. Are we taking this robot with us? Said Ford, looking with distaste at Marvin, who was standing in an awkward, hunched posture in the corner under a small palm tree. Zaphod glanced away from the mirror screens, which presented a panoramic view of the blighted landscape on which the Heart of Gold had now landed. Oh, the paranoid android, he said. Yeah, we'll take him. But what are you supposed to do with a manically depressed robot? You think you've got problems, said Marvin, as if he was addressing a newly occupied coffin. What are you supposed to do if you are a manically depressed robot? Now, don't bother to answer that. I'm 50,000 times more intelligent than you, and even I don't know the answer. It gives me a headache just trying to think down to your level. Trillian burst in through the door from her cabin. My white mice have escaped, she said. An expression of deep worry and concern failed to cross either of Zaphod's faces. Nuts to your white mice, you said. Trillian glared an upset glare at him and disappeared again. It is possible that her remark would have commanded greater attention had it been generally realized that human beings were only the third most intelligent life form present on the planet Earth, instead of, as we generally thought by most independent observers, the second. Who's first? What's first? Good afternoon, boys. The voice was oddly familiar, but oddly different. It had a matriarchal twang. It announced itself to the crew as they arrived at the airlock hatchway that would let them out on the planet's surface. They looked at each other in puzzlement. "It's the computer," explained Zaphod. "I discovered it had an emergency backup personality that I thought might work out better." "Now this is going to be your first day out on a strange new planet," continued Eddie's new voice, "so I want you all wrapped up snug and warm, and no playing with any naughty bug-eyed monsters." Zaphod taped impatiently on the hatch. "I'm sorry," he said. "I think we might be better off with a slide rule." Right, snapped the computer. "Who said that?" "Will you open up the exit hatch, please, computer?" said Zaphod, trying not to get angry. "Not until whoever said that owns up," urged the computer, stamping a few synapses closed. "Oh, God," muttered Ford, slumped against a bulkhead. He started to count to 10. He was desperately worried that one day sentient life forms would forget how to do this. Only by counting could humans demonstrate their independence of computers. "Come on," said Eddie sternly. "Computer," began Zaphod. "I'm waiting," interrupted Eddie. "I can wait all day if necessary." "Computer," said Zaphod again, who had been trying to think of some subtle piece of reasoning to put the computer down with, and had decided not to bother competing with it on its own ground. "If you don't open that exit hatch this moment, I shall zap straight off to your major databanks and reprogram you with a very large axe. Got that?" Eddie, shocked, paused and considered this. Ford carried on counting quietly. "This is about the most aggressive thing you can do to a computer. The equivalent of going up to a human being and saying, 'Blood, blood, blood, blood.'" Finally, Eddie said quietly, "I can see this relationship is something we're all going to have to work at." And the hatchway opened. An icy wind ripped into them. They hugged themselves warmly and stepped down the ramp onto the barren dust of Magrathea. "It'll all end in tears, I know it," shouted Eddie after them, and closed the hatchway again. A few minutes later, he opened and closed the hatchway again in response to a command that caught him entirely by surprise. We are going to stop there. I still have no poetry. I actually do. Here we go. So we are going to end with one of our living poets, because we quote Deadliest so much. He is on Instagram known as Cubs the Poet. I think that might, he's pretty cool. You should go check him out. I have a sticker on my laptop of one of his poems. And it says, "The youth have value, not of time or money, but of the luxury to misunderstand the present moment in acknowledgement that more time is to come." All right. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for doing your little daily dose of D. Hopefully we'll get there. We will get to the goal. Check you out later. Have a good one. Bye.